I have shared my screen and I'm going to turn my video off. Um, and what I have up right now is a Folgerpedia page with a list of online resources for early modern English paleography. So I normally teach paleography in like a 40-hour chunk, and I'm attempting to do it in 35 minutes or less. So this is going to be a challenge. What I'm going to do is merely point you to places that you can go and then take some, hopefully you'll have lots of questions that I can then sort of guide what else you all would like to know. This list of online resources is on Folgerpedia, which is the Folger's in-house wiki, so it's very easy to make changes and additions. This is essentially a bibliography that I've been using with the paleography classes that I've been teaching for the past 15 years or so, and I've been adding to it and subtracting from it. And in fact, I just went in last night just to make sure all the links were working, since I hadn't actually checked the links in a year or two, and many of them had changed. So hopefully the links that I've now added are more permalinks, and they should all work. But I think that reflects just the increasing number of ways that institutions, repositories, and projects are trying to share the images and the resources that they have, and it's been an evolving process. So this bibliography is divided into some different sections, and then I also have a bibliography, which I'll share with you, of print resources. So this is only online things. And I'm going to start just by describing a few tutorials, online tutorials that are out there. And these contain a lot of the same, each of them contain a lot of same or overlapping information, but it's useful to check out the different ones because the way they do it is slightly different for each one, and they use different manuscripts, and there are different levels of interactivity. So you may find, for example, if you go to the University of Cambridge site, you whip through those 28 manuscripts that they put up there and want to try your hand at some others. So these other resources provide further practice. None of them are particularly up to date, and I can't guarantee that they're going to be there forever. One of them, the David Possel site, I actually, now we have to go to an archived version of it because it's no longer being supported. And the University of Cambridge one, the English Handwriting 1500 to 1700, they've actually, their current, this is actually an older version of their online course because the newer version has disappeared from online. So the University of Cambridge one is good. I'm sorry there's noise in the background. I have a puppy scratching at the floor right now. Is good because it's sortable by difficulty level. So if you want to start with something easy and basic, you can, and then you can work your way up. The Scottish Archive Network I actually like that one more than the others. It feels a little bit more up to date, and Scottish paleography is basically the same thing as English paleography in terms of this period. So don't not go to that site just because it says Scottish on it. One of the most useful ones is Bess of Hardwicke's Letters, which is not where you would expect to find a tutorial, but there is one there. So if you click on the site and you go to an individual letter, not all of the letters have this, but many of the letters have it, where you can try your hand at transcribing it, and it will tell you as you're transcribing whether or not you're transcribing it correctly or not. So it will go from red, which is incorrect, to black when you've corrected yourself. The Brigham Young University one is not as great. The image quality is not that great, but again, it might, everybody learns secretary hand in different ways. So there might be something on it that works for you. And then the Folger Shakespeare Library. We don't have an interactive tutorial yet. I hope someday we do, but we do have our early modern manuscripts online site, which contains over 100 letters from our collection of various difficulty levels with the image and then 3 forms of transcription: the diplomatic, semi-diplomatic, and normalized. And there's a way, let me just click on that to show you how you can use this for practicing paleography. If you go to Browse Transcriptions on EMO, and then pick a letter, you can view it diplomatic, semi-diplomatic, or regularized. Diplomatic is where we're trying to represent the transcription as close to the manuscript quirkiness of the abbreviations and orthography or spelling as possible. So you can see that on the left. Semi-diplomatic, we expand the abbreviations, but we indicate where things have been expanded by putting them in italics. So that's slightly more accessible. And then the regularized version allows you to, it's modernized spelling. And that's what operates the search, is by, you can search across these 100 letters by keyword spelled in a modern way. But if you want to try your hand at it, you could view just the image only and write down a line and then go to the text or the text that way and compare. So that's a non-interactive, where you create your own interactivity. Okay, so we were here. So early modern secretary hand was the most common form of handwriting in the 16th and 17th centuries in England. It originally came about because, well, it was secretaries who needed a more efficient form of handwriting to write down everything their masters were saying, essentially. And they needed a cursive hand where there weren't as many pen lifts. So the medieval hands were, had many more pen lifts in them, and so you could not write as quickly. And so this hand gradually evolved, secretary hand, and the letter forms are very different in many cases from the letter forms we use in cursive handwriting today, or italic hand as well. And you need, a lot of graduate students are told, just go to the archive and figure it out. But it really is useful to have as many resources at your hands as possible before you start delving into the manuscripts or the digitized manuscripts. The digitized manuscripts are of no use to you unless you can read the handwriting. So getting them transcribed is something the Folger is doing to try to democratize access to the images and make them more accessible and searchable. But in this section here, the digital images of manuscripts, this is just pulling together a lot of digitized manuscripts that are already out there. And most of these have not been transcribed, although there might be metadata associated with them that make them searchable. The one that I want to pull out here of this list, and I'll share the link to this Folgerpedia page in the chat, is again the Folger image collection, but more specifically Luna's Folger manuscript transcriptions collection. So let me go there and show you this resource. So this is one that is constantly growing. So this is Luna. This is our current digital asset management system. And if you click on Folger manuscript transcriptions, which I've already done, you can search over 7,600 images that have transcriptions associated with them. And this number is growing every day because we have an active crowdsourcing community who are working to get these transcriptions made and then vetted, and then we add them almost immediately to this. So you can search, over, I mean, I haven't quite figured out a way to count how many words are in this right now, but it's well over 500,000 right now. So there's a lot of material in there. There's a heavy dose of recipe books that are transcribed on here right now, but there are also many, many other things as well. And let me just show, you could type in a word like rhubarb, and it'll pull up all of the pages that have the word rhubarb in them. So I'll click on this one randomly, and you can see where in the transcription it appears, 1 ounce of rhubarb in most subtle powder. And then you could look up here and see it in the manuscript as well. So that's another place to sort of work on your, oh, and here's another rhubarb. Take the best rhubarb and beat it very small. So this is another place you can go to see transcriptions against the manuscripts themselves if you're trying to learn, or you don't want to learn, but you still want to be able to access what's in the manuscripts. There are many subscription databases full of digital images. So, in this time of remote work, if you have access to those databases, if you're attached to an institution, that's one way of getting to them. The Folger and other libraries I know you can apply to be a remote reader at the Folger, and then that gives you access to our subscription databases. And I know that other institutions are doing this as well. I've also added a section of useful catalogs and databases, and then also online guides for interpreting literary and historical manuscripts. So use this in any way you want. I mean, one I'll just point out here is the Ian's English Calendar. That's a way to understand the quirky dating in the early modern English calendrical system. And then another place that I like to spend a lot of time in is the National Archives and Kew Research Guides for Medieval and Early Modern History. And they're actually providing free access to their online digitized manuscripts right now. So now's a good time to go in there and download as many manuscripts as you can. So I limited the search and research guides to medieval and early modern history and found 44 guides. And you click on any one of these and they give you the context of what sort of manuscripts you might encounter and what their administrative purpose is. And let's see, how did I get here? Let me back into it. So that's this webpage again, what sort of things it offers. I also want to point out, just in the header here, I have a link to Practical Paleography, and that, I will just go there now. This is, we teach paleography at the Folger in a formal way through the Folger Institute, but we're also teaching anybody who wants to learn. And we've had a number of in-house series that originally were meeting in person in the boardroom of the Folger. And we were getting like local grad students and docents and readers and Folger staff. But now during this remote working period, we have moved completely online. And so we're calling it the Practical Paleography COVID series. And we meet every day at Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So I just finished a session a few minutes ago. And right now it's a group of about 15 people, but we welcome more to come in. And this summer we're also, I'm happy to do a beginner session as well. And so I hope you can join that if you're interested in either of those sessions. I haven't set up a time for the beginner session yet, because that's a good community to be in. It's people, I find working with students, it's much easier to learn in a group and to be all holding hands together virtually as we're doing this, because it can be I would find it very frustrating if I had to learn this, self-teach it. And so it's a nice group. Past groups have gone on to continue transcribing together in the transcription platform that we developed at the Folger, which is called Dromio. So practical paleography. And then I also want to point you to the alphabet book. And I have that open already here. And this is, I mean, it's like 100 pages. It's what I use for all of the teaching that I do, but you can, I hope this is the most recent one. I just saw 2018, but it's from 2020. I just went through and checked it. This is what I use for the month-long, the week-long, the practical paleography, but it's here for you to use as well. And I would have to say I'm using things that are not, you know, some of them may be in copyright. I've cut and pasted from various books and other things, and I've cited them, but so this is not a published work. It's sort of an online tool for you to use. One of the things I want to show you in it is, I just want to quickly go through the basic advices for reading secretary hand. And the first one, and this one is really important, is it's not an exact science. It is an art. There are specific rules, there are specific terminologies for interpreting and reading and thinking about secretary hand, describing it, but this was a style of writing that was used by so many people. So secretary hand in many ways is much more difficult than learning the medieval hands, because the medieval hands were written by professional scribes, and they were basically paid to make their hand look like everybody else's hand. There was very little individualization compared to the early modern period. So by Shakespeare's time, so many more people are literate, so many more people are writing. People have learned how to write from so many different people, and they're a variety of ages. The people teaching them are a variety of ages, and so you get like early-ish looking secretary hand being used by people late in the 17th century because of the way the hand was passed down to them. So there are different forms of secretary hand in that way, you know, and there's fast. When you write fast, you write in one way. When you write in a formal hand, you're much neater and more intentional about each stroke. And some people are just better at it than others. And so there are a lot of messy secretary hands. So for those reasons, it's very hard. It can be very hard to read. And because many of these people were never intending to publish their works or whatever they're writing, there are ambiguities that you don't find in print. So things that are really unresolvable. There's no exact answer, or sometimes you just can't read something, or you read it and you're pretty sure that the person was trying to do one thing, but they're doing something else, and then you have to decide how you're going to interpret that. So when I teach paleography, you know, I share all the rules and tips and tricks, but then we always come across something that breaks whatever rule I had just said. And I think if you put 2, 3 expert paleographers in front of the same manuscript and have them transcribe it, each person is going to perhaps do something a little bit different. It's not going to look exactly like the transcriptions. You also need to forget what modern letters look like. That's very important. And you need to forget how to spell as well. And you need to remind your computer to forget how to spell as well. So it's good to have if you're transcribing online, you want to turn autocorrect off in your browser, because it is important. If you're transcribing from a manuscript, you can do all the modernizing you want in your second stage, but when you're initially transcribing something, you want to maintain the original spelling, even if it's so far different from how we would spell a word today. Often I encounter words that I've never seen before, so I always have the OED open to go check on whether or not what I'm seeing could actually be a word which is now considered obsolete or archaic. It's important to pay attention to the punctuation, and punctuation was very different in this period as well, but we want to record that. Linguists are very interested in, you know, these archaic spellings and obsolete words, and the punctuation as well. And I'm just going to skip through these so we can get to the actual alphabet. When I teach it, we always have quill day pretty early on, and that's a day where we're all handed quills and we learn how the quills are cut, and sometimes we try and cut them ourselves. We make some iron gall ink, which was a sort of ink that was used in the paper, and we use paper that was made by Timothy Barrett at University of Iowa that closely resembles the sort of rag paper that was in use at the time. And we set everybody up at angled writing surfaces, and we copy out whatever. Often we use an ink recipe. Everyone tries to write their name. So you're trying to write secretary letters in order to get those strokes and the direction of the strokes into your muscle memory. And I can't tell you how helpful that is in terms of getting it into your muscle memory, and then it really helps your fingers type the right words. It's like an important step in the process. And you can do this with paper and pencil too. When I first learned, I would always, before, and this is what I was taught, just take a blank piece of paper when you're with a new manuscript and write the alphabet, just the letters of the alphabet in a column. And then as you encounter those letters in the manuscript, write them down, copy them out in the way that you're formed. And you're basically creating your own crib sheet for reading the manuscript. And that's super helpful. It almost then becomes like a crossword puzzle where you have, you can then go back to the manuscript and read words, and you can pick out many of the letters, but not all of them. But then through context, that can help you arrive at what the letter might be. Okay, so now I'm just going to go down and show you the alphabet. And this I have taken from the appendix of Philip Gaskell's New Introduction to Bibliography, but he in turn grabbed it from Mackenzie's Introduction to Bibliography, not Mackenzie, Macaro's Introduction to Bibliography. So that's where you can find it if you want to go back to the actual source. I like this because the letter forms are taken from manuscripts. Often you see as the exemplar for English secretary hand a woodcut from a writing manual from the end of the 16th century. And those letters do not have the sort of liveliness or expressiveness or variety to them that you would actually see in the wild. So these are more the forms of letters that you would see in the wild. And it's useful to think of, as you're committing these letters, the way they're shaped, to memory, think of them in different groupings. So we'll often in class go through the vowels together, the A, E, I's, O's, and U's. But then there are many other groupings that turn up as you're doing that. So think of it as an alphabet that has loop descenders. So you want to look at all of the letter forms that have loop descenders, and you could learn those together. Or descenders, and notice which direction the descenders are going in. So for example, in this G, the tail is going to the left, and in the Y, it's going to the right. I often point out letters that resemble each other, and you need to use context to differentiate or really understand the subtle differences between them. So for example, this is a form of reverse E, this first example. And this second example is also a form of reverse E. But if you look at how these first three Ds are formed, they're formed in a very similar way. And so you need to use the other clues to help you figure out whether you're encountering an E or a D in some words. The same can be said of this form of E, which is we call a Greek E or an epsilon E. But if you look down at the letter R, there's a form of the letter R that looks like a Greek E or an epsilon E. Another category of letters are the minim letters. So think of the word minim, M-I-N-I-M, and each of those letters, it has a simple downstroke to it. So the minim letters are I, M, N, and U. So often you'll encounter a word that has a bunch of minims together, and you actually have to count them on the bottom to determine what the letter combination might be, because if you look at, for example, this M right here, it could be a U and an I without a dot, or it could be an I and an N. And so you need to look at the letters on either side to determine what it is. And the confusing thing about minim letters is the dot on an I is used or not used, as is the case, but when it is used, the I will sometimes drift over and not actually be above the minim that it's referring to. And then the majuscules can get quite crazy, as you can see here. And what's particularly delightful about English Secretary Hand is there's this third form that is not, you cannot represent typographically, but I'm convinced it's a thing. So the lowercase in the print world, we refer to as minuscules, and then the uppercase are majuscules. But then there are these letter forms, which are, I think of and call mediascules. There's something in between a minuscule and a majuscule. And this is another example of paleography not being an exact science. You need to figure out what you're going to do about those intermediate letters and what case you're going to assign them to, which is very frustrating. And I wish the keyboard did have sort of a third case that we could use to describe those. So please download this alphabet book. It has an abbreviation section as well. And we've tried to include a lot of examples of abbreviations you'll encounter. And then I've reproduced from various works that are in the printed bibliography at the end, other alphabets that have been reproduced, other abbreviations. There's a lot of good stuff in here, including numbers and dating and writing with a quill, and then this bibliography at the end, and then charts from the University of Nottingham on how to figure out what this legal manuscript is that you're looking at, what it actually is. So it's a deeds in depth flow chart. So I hope that is useful to you as well. I'm very conscious of time, so I just want to point out one more thing, and that is some games on Quizlet. So I'm actively creating these, and you are welcome to go try them out. You could start with short words and abbreviations. Let me just show you what that is. These are flashcards, which you can flip over and see. And then there are games that you can play and ways that you can test yourself on these words. So for example, you can go to, once you've mastered them in the flashcards and the other stages, you can try and match words together. And I find this is a good way at just learning, using a different part of your brain to try and get these new letter forms into your memory and muscle memory. So there is a link to that as well, right here, where it says under Folger Shakespeare Library, the MO Beta and a series of practical paleography flashcards and games on Quizlet. All right, so as we only have 40 minutes, I would love to get some questions from you. And we have Is that okay, Erin, to switch over to questions now?
Yeah, absolutely. Just make sure you read the whole question aloud for the recording.
I will. Okay, so the question we have right now is, are there any traces that someone's personal handwriting leave in the secretary hand? For example, if we have 2 letters written in secretary hand, is it possible to verify if they were written by the same hand? Possibly, yes. So that is a question I get all the time. Does this person's handwriting look like this person's handwriting? And if they are 2 letters or pieces of correspondence written at the same period in a person's life, then yes, that is comparing like with like, and it is quite possible. And you have to be careful though of just like looking at them and just thinking like, yes, they feel alike. There is some work you can do to corroborate whether or not 2 things are alike or not. One thing you can do is go back to your crib sheet. So you make a crib sheet for both of them, you copy out the letter forms exactly as you see them. And then you also copy out entire words, or you compare entire words or entire abbreviations, because those can be unique to somebody. Or you can compare the abbreviations, the words, or the ligatures. So if there's like a TH or a CT or an SH form, you'll want to look at those, because that's sometimes an individual, a tell of someone's way of personalizing the handwriting. What's a lot trickier is looking at marginalia in a book and then trying to ascertain who wrote that marginalia, and is it the same person who wrote this letter. You often don't know. I mean, you're often dealing with undated handwriting, and people's handwriting evolves over the years, but also people's handwriting changes according to their purpose or intent. If they're writing a very formal letter or whipping off a hasty note, sometimes you can't, or they're writing in italic hand in one case or secretary hand in another, it's really hard to determine whether or not it's the same hand. And if you think about it, if someone's writing marginalia in a book, they're writing and the book is bound, they're writing, their hand is holding the quill differently at a different angle in a more cramped way. They're trying to fit their writing into a tighter margin than a regular standard sheet of pot paper from this period. So there are many things that could make the hand different when it is actually the same hand as well. So I would just say you have to be really careful when you're identifying hands. And if you're making a case for saying these 2 hands are the same or they're different, I hope I've given you some ways to sort of make steps to follow to make that argument. What other questions do people have? Okay, so we have one. Could the quill be from any type of bird? Yes, there were multiple birds that were used for their quill feathers, but the most common one was a goose. And for right-handed people, which people were strongly encouraged to be right-handed in this period, it would be the 2nd or 3rd wing feather from the left wing. So you want the curve to be sort of the opposite, the curve of the quill to be the opposite of the hand that you're writing with, which is why they would use the quills from the left wing feather. But they could also use the quills of much smaller birds for finer writing. And I've even seen some inscriptions in books that explicitly say, or in manuscripts say, like, this is written with an eagle's feather or a raven. So there are other big birds that were used, and a turkey quill I've seen as well. Okay, another question. Are the practical paleography groups open to Canadians? Yes, they're open to anyone, anywhere. The last one I was in just had someone from Australia and the Netherlands. And you would find out how to join by checking that practical paleography page that I showed you. I'm going to post, yeah, so you would contact me to get the Zoom info. And Erin maybe can type my email address into the chat so that you can find it there, or you can find out how to contact me on the Folger website, and I'd be happy to get you into a practical paleography class. And then another question. You mentioned that the English and Scottish hands are compatible for training. Do you find other Europeans of the same era useful? French hands from this period have some similar features. Italian, not so much, and Spanish hands also are very not similar to secretary hand. But there are some sharing, like, you know, the elite people who were also switching between the vernacular and Latin. You see some abbreviations that are similar because of that, that international language that they were sharing. And then, do we have time for one more, Erin?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, can you say anything more about iron gall ink or the required ink? Was ink from berries, peels ever allowed? Yes, so iron gall ink has 3 main ingredients. You have, well, in addition to water or vinegar or wine, you have the gall nuts, which usually come from oak galls, and the galls have the tannin in them, and they are formed from a wasp sort of laying eggs on the surface of a limb, and then this hard growth forms around it. So those would get pulverized and provide the tannin in the iron gall ink, or the gall, as they would call it. And then your other ingredient that reacts with the gall is the iron, or in this case, it's iron sulfate or ferrous sulfate. And that's basically like rust with acid over it. And that, when you mix that, and that's a powdery substance, with the iron, with the galls, the solution goes from this sort of muddy brown color to this brilliant midnight blue black color. And then the third ingredient is gum arabic. And gum arabic, again, is turned into a powder form, and that holds the other ingredients in suspension. And they're almost all manuscript recipe books from the period include recipes for how to make black ink. And those 3 ingredients are always there. And then sometimes they'll add fancy things like pomegranate seeds. But usually it's just those 3 ingredients plus water or alcohol-based substance that also serves as a preservative. And there are different rules for like heating it up and letting it sit over a period of time to make it richer. But it was something that it was made in the household more commonly than purchased, particularly in the Elizabethan and Stuart periods. And you'll often see multiple recipes in the same book as people try and play with the different proportions, because if there's too much iron or ferrous sulfate, you get, well, it manifests now as iron gall ink damage, which sort of eats through the page.
Heather, since I know you have to be at your next paleography lesson very soon, let's make this the last question. Is that okay?
Yes, that is fine.
Great.
Okay, so the question is how to deal with capital letters, which are so confusing in book ownership inscriptions, when there's no document to go to and compare. And yes, that names are some of the hardest things to decipher for sure. it becomes easier as you become more familiar with the different names that were in use in the period. So there were a limited number of Christian names or first names that were used. But again, usually with last names, I start from the back or the middle and just start picking out the letters, and then really study the majuscules in the alphabet book that I shared with you, because once you sort of get in the back of your brain, like, oh, I think I've seen this form before, you can just go through methodically and try and find something that matches. Sometimes the first name, though, is just the first initial, or it's abbreviated in some ways, so that can make it tricky as well. So yeah, it's easy to take this, and you should ask other people. Like, if you can't read a name, send it out to whatever paleographical cohort you have, or put it out there on Twitter, and people are always happy to help.
Well, thank you so much for going through all of this today. I certainly learned a lot. And I hope everyone saw Heather's email in the chat. If you do want to join her paleography study group, that sounds really great. And everyone take good care, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Heather.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Erin.
Bye.
Bye.